Well, something tweeted it.
Yep.
Maybe Imo has it set up to auto do it.
Great.
Spalcher, Kalispera, and Dobry Večer. So we're doing some more API review off of the handy dandy backlog list, and hopefully we have enough people to make progress. So, first on the docket, because apparently no milestone sorts higher than all milestones, 44025. Does anybody have context on this one?
Yeah, I have context on it. There's a customer asked for us to expose a setting from WinHTTP in the WinHTTP handler that controls TCP keep alive, that basically turns on TCP keep alive and allows you to configure a couple properties related to TCP keep alive. So the proposal here is to expose some settings that allow you to both turn on TCP keep alive and to define the interval and stuff like that. I'm just looking at the issue. It's been a little while since I looked at it. It's fairly straightforward. I think that we should talk about exactly how the settings are exposed. As defined here, it's like a separate class for a separate WinHTTP class that may be a little funky. We may want to just kill that and flatten this out into properties on the WinHTTP handler class itself, rather than having like a nested class, or not nested, but like a class value property. There is some precedent here in, if you scroll down to alternative designs, there's some precedent here in service point. You can click that and see how the existing service point API works. However, the service point API is it's not a property, it's like a set these three things. I think we want to expose this as a property as opposed to like a set method. But the nice thing about the set method is you can just pass all three things in at once.
So on this, sorry. Were you like finished with your thought? Because I kind of was wondering if we need this. Like, I don't think we've been asked for this on the server.
So we have been asked for this from some folks in IC3. And the reason that they wanted in WinHTTP handler specifically is because they're not on .NET Core yet. They're on Framework, and so they only have access to WinHTTP handler. They have some sort of, it's been a while since I read through this, but they've got some sort of like concerns about connection pooling that and load balancing, that turning this on seems to help them in certain situations.
Do you know if they've disabled HTTP keep alive?
They have not disabled HTTP keep alive.
So that would still time out, even with TCP keep alive, and I would think on most servers.
I can dig up the details if you're interested. Basically, at some point we said, look, if you tell us that this, improves your COGS by 5%, then sure, we'll do it, right? And it's really, on our side, it's really just grab the values and call, the WinHTTP set property on the session or something like that. So it's a small amount of work. And in general, we have tried to push back on any changes to WinHTTP handler and say, look, we really want you on Sockets HTTP handler. That's where the perf is. It's cross-platform. That's where the investment is. It's more extensible. Sockets HTTP handler in 5.0 supports this already through the connect callback hook, but and they've said, yeah, we know that, but we aren't planning on moving to core for like a year, and this is like a big win for us. And we said, okay, we can obviously be flexible about a few enhancements, but we don't want to make major investments in WinHTTP handler.
What do you mean not moving on to core? How would they use this API?
We ship a package with WinHTTP handler.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yes, sorry.
Just for record, we did something similar in the curl handler a long time ago that, again, in standard network conditions, it just fixed the problems with the low-level networking gear like load balancers and firewalls. And also, as ultra, we also discussed and we decided to be overkill, so that's why we end up specific because there are other properties the WinHTTP has, but we decided not to expose them kind of in generic way because again it was just complicated. So this is basically the bare bone minimum to meet the customer need and sort of move on.
So you have someone has the comment here of the default keep alive time if exposed as a property would be 2 hours based on the Windows default. Is that something to be actually queried, or is that Windows has a current default and they could change it in the future, but we've said 2 hours, and so it's 2 hours from now on?
The default's disabled, but if it's enabled, it's 2 hours. And that's for like any socket where you enable TCP keep alive. It's very rarely used for HTTP because like the timeouts for HTTP keep alive are much shorter generally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, properties are probably nicer, but I don't know why people would really be reading it back. It seems like a thing that you set it to the policy that you want, and you don't care what it would have had. So for minimizing surface area, I'd suggest just the set TCP keep alive like Service Point had.
One of the benefits of having readable properties is if there is, an error in production, you can kind of just dump this and see what the values were. But I mean, you can do that even without property getters anyway, because presumably you'd have a debugger attached and you could just inspect the field yourself. So.
Yep.
The other thing that's probably worth looking at is if you look under alternative designs, there's a link to see where it says C number 31198. Go to that because it shows how something similar, not the same feature, but the ping timeouts. This is how the ping timeouts are configured on Socket HTTP handler for HTTP2. In other words, it's just 3 properties on the handler itself. One that's, even though it's an enum, it's basically a bool. Well, no, it's not a. I mean, it's an enum, but it's got 2 values. Sorry, it's not really a bool. And then the time span for the delay and timeout. So instead of having a separate class, we could just have 3 properties on the handler itself. That where the third is like bool, enable TCP keep alive or something like that.
And to keep the names together, keep alive time, interval, and enabled seem.
Yeah. And by the way, now that I'm looking at this should almost certainly be called TCP keep alive, not just keep alive, because keep alive in HTTP usually means something else.
Yes.
Yeah, if you're putting them as first-class properties directly on the type, yeah, you should have the TCP prefix. I think the proposal, as it was listed, had TCP on the property already.
It had it on the WinHTTP handler property, but then on the type that they created, they didn't.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the other properties on WinHTTP handler, and I don't see any examples of like complex property objects on there. Everything seems to be a primitive or an enum hanging directly off of WinHTTP handler.
Yeah. That's true for Socket's HP handler as well, I believe.
Okay. Yeah. So I think that would be another argument for not doing the additional class.
Yeah, I think the class is the worst of the proposed options because it's adding another type that's not really needed. I don't think that we expect it ever to really grow in complexity. So, partial. Okay, so I think we think that. I added the TCP prefixes and flattened everything onto the handler.
Yeah, do we want to include the default values, or do we not care about that?
I mean,
the
sounds
spec
implementation.
requires 2 hours minimum default. I just pasted it in chat, so we can't go lower than that if we want to be like spec compliant.
Meaning it would throw if you set it to half an hour?
I just mean that you'd be violating the RFC. I don't know what would actually happen.
Would a component beneath us throw an exception?
I doubt it because it's just a requirement on the default. Like I linked to it in chat. So how would the other side know?
What we should do then is we should just we should test what happens if we specify a nonsensical value there. If the operating system swallows it and ignores it, we probably should too. If the operating system produces some random error that would be very hard to diagnose, then we should do an argument check on our side. That would be my preference anyway. Because I don't really like us putting policy. If we're supposed to act as a thin shim over the OS, I don't like us putting policy that the OS itself wouldn't have.
I agree.
By the way, reading the properties on a non-supported platform, what would the gets do? Just return the default values? Is that what we decided?
Yeah, that seems reasonable.
I mean, yeah.
Okay.
Like, yeah, I don't know if, and I guess this is part of the question of the property of if you're on a older Windows and you set keep alive to true, does that not do anything? Does it throw in the set? Does it throw when you create the request? If the docs just say it enables TCP keep alive when available, then you can just eat the I don't know what to do with this error.
Yeah. It also means that you don't need the supported OS platform attribute. If the docs say like it has no effect on non-supported platforms, because at that point it really is just a request, not a demand.
That would make sense to me. I think it's so much better behavior.
That does raise the issue of like, do we want a supports TCP keep alive property or something like that?
What would people do with that information?
Complain.
Sure, but I mean, you could do an OS check yourself if you really cared, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, if it says false, so I guess it comes. Yeah, there's a bunch of implementation things. If you feel like you need the supported later, you can. But if what you're doing is just collecting properties, passing them to the OS, and it either supports them or doesn't, then I don't know that you really need the supported flag. Because really that would be avoid the throw, is why you would call it. If it's supported, set these properties, otherwise don't. But all right. Anything else? Oh, I guess I should check and see if chat has anything.
Is 20 or 04 supposed to be the actual like Windows version number?
I think so.
Okay, so 19041.
What?
because 2004 is not like an actual. That's a friendly name. That's not a like actual Windows version name.
Yeah. So you're saying that's not the right value to have there.
Yeah, I'm saying we should just make sure we put the right value there,
Yeah.
rather than copy paste it.
Makes sense.
Okay.
All right. Last call. Last call. Done.
Woo.
All right, the crypto thing. Jeremy, you're up. Thank you, Jeremy. All right, so we've previously seen this issue and approved it. So I have a big block of stuff up here, which is what we had already approved. But we recently added support for Cypher feedback mode, and so now this is adding the API to expose Cypher feedback mode, and then that showed that we had oversimplified the API previously, so there's a change after this. So for, I guess scrolling back up, so in ECB, which is, what is that, Levi? Something codebook?
Electronic codebook.
Thank you. So in electronic codebook, we said the padding mode was a mandatory argument. You give a ciphertext, or if you're decrypting, it's plain text, and there is no IV because ECB doesn't have an IV. When we move up into cipher block chaining, or CBC, now you gain the IV as a mandatory argument. We defaulted the padding because this is almost always what you want. And then when we move into CFB, the cipher feedback gains an extra argument of how big is the feedback size, which everything only supports either 8 or the block size of the algorithm, but theoretically something could support partial feedback in the future. It also has a default padding, it has a default feedback size of 8, which is what almost everyone wants, and it has mandatory ciphertext and IV. So it's just the same as all the previous stuff, except it says CFB instead of ECB or CBC. And then we had previously approved a method called getCipherTextLength. You tell it what kind of padding you're doing, so it knows whether or not it would need to add a block if you're block aligned, and how long it's going to be, and it tells you how long the output would be. But in CFB, the size of the padding changes what the answer would be, so it needs that question, which means that instead of having one method which complicatedly takes parameters that it ignores sometimes, we split it into 3 that look just like the encrypt signature. Or, I mean, they have a length instead of an array, but...
I'm probably missing some context here, but why don't we have like classes defined that just have like encrypt, decrypt, and get length or whatever it is, get ciphertext length, and then you instantiate one of those, pass in settings like padding mode and feedback size bits to that.
Well, that's actually sort of what we have right now for the base class, and it does it with a unified thing on everything, and the enum padding mode is a property, and then it has a bunch of other properties, some of which matter depending on what your padding mode is, and some of which don't matter, and no one understands how anything interacts. And so this proposal was so that you don't have to create as many objects, and you can just take your key object and tell it, like, I'm encrypting in BCFB, and oh look, now it tells me what all the things that CFB needs are.
Okay, so like in general, so you're saying if I know I want to use this particular encryption algorithm, then it's actually simpler to just use these flat things because it tells me exactly what I need to pass in every time.
Yeah.
As opposed to instantiating some abstraction that has 16 properties and I only care about 2 of them.
Right. Well, I mean, yeah. So you do need to instantiate the symmetric algorithm object, and it will still have all those properties. But if you call these new methods, we don't care about any of them. The only thing that it's wrapping at that point is the key.
So you would call AES.create, for instance, to get an instance of an AES object, and then these would be one-shot methods, effectively. The way that the existing APIs work is you create there's the symmetric algorithm base class that Jeremy has on the screen right now. Classes like AES, triple des, and so on subclass this, and then in order to perform an encryption or a decryption operation, you have to set properties like the IV and the key, and then call create encryptor or create decryptor, which will give you an instance of an iCrypto transform, and then you have to pass that into a crypto stream, and then you have to keep feeding your data in piecemeal, and it actually ends up being an enormous amount of work. Whereas these new APIs are, no, here's a byte array, just get out of my way and encrypt the damn thing, using the particular algorithm that I want you to use.
Yeah, so I totally buy that argument that the crap we've got today with, encryptors and decryptors and crypto streams requires 16 steps, and it's not very efficient, and it's a pain to use. And it'd be simpler to just have flat encrypt and decrypt APIs. Mm-hmm. That said, it seems like we could have flat encrypt and decrypt APIs without having a different version, while still baking in while still having a notion of a setting properties on the class about which cipher suite you're using and stuff like that.
Yeah, because honestly, I want the symmetric algorithm in similar types just to burn to the ground. Like I don't want to keep messing with him going forward. Like I would rather honestly stand up. If we're going to have like an easy to use crypto API, I would honestly rather just stand up a parallel stack.
But yeah, I mean, if we did it with new types that help, I want to be CFB, then either we have to multiply that by the number of symmetric algorithms we support, which is 4, 5.
We don't though, because like, is anyone seriously going to use triple des CFB? Like,
yes.
Is CFB actually defined for any algorithm other than AES?
CFB was originally defined for DES, so yes. In fact,
I'm thinking CTS. Sorry, is CTS is CTS even in here?
No, we don't support ciphertext stealing.
Okay, never mind.
That would be theft. No, yeah.
Thanks.
Because in .NET 5 we actually got a bug that triple des CFB was inconsistent between framework and core. So someone uses triple des CFB.
Because the other thing is, if we were maybe I'm distracting too much, but if we were to stand up a parallel stack, we don't have to make investments at all in DES or triple DES in this parallel stack. We say, look, if you need those algorithms, use the old stack.
Indeed.
Wash your hands of it.
Yep, but like all parallel stack problems, we'd have to figure out how to interact with the existing universe in meaningful ways, and we're not there yet, but it is getting hard to hold on to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, alternatively, we could make, a class CFB, and you pass a symmetric algorithm and comma all the other stuff it needs into it, but that then means that we would have to figure out how to allow that to work in an inheritance model like we already have, so basically it just ends up putting them back all in this class. Like, the fact that we need all these virtuals is really what's doing it. But anyway, so yes.
The default implementations of the virtuals just set the properties and then set up all the crypto stream stuff for you, right? So we have
the default virtuals will throw if the properties don't match what you asked it to do, and then they'll call create encryptor. That was the decision last time, is they won't modify the state of the object because that's a threading concern.
Yes, that is correct. Because the objects are kind of sort of half-assedly thread safe right now.
Yep. Ain't it great?
Yeah.
So so the thing that's being reviewed right now is exploding ciphertext length from one method into 3 and adding all the CFB members.
Is this going to be a pit of failure potentially if somebody instantiates one of these objects and then calls like get ciphertext length CBC with a padding mode other than PKCS7, like would we expect that to immediately throw?
No. Why would it? We support CBC with no padding and with zeros and ANSI.
But we can't change the property on the current symmetric algorithm.
No, but the get length won't care. Get length, we're not gonna. There's no virtual. Like we just know the answer straight up.
Oh, right. That's sealed. That's not virtual. Okay, got it.
Yeah. Get length is it none? Or sorry, is it none or zero? Then we don't need to add a new block. Otherwise, we need to add a new block if it's aligned, and otherwise lift it to the block size.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
But call it, so instantiating one of these, instantiating an AES and then calling like try encrypt CFB, for instance, will fail or return false, correct?
If you call AES.create, it'll work. It'll only fail for user-defined types.
Got it. So we'll make all of the inbox ones succeed. So
the inbox ones aren't going to ever read the properties in these methods at all.
Okay. Okay. So it won't be a pet of failure in that regard.
Yeah.
That seems reasonable then. Yeah.
All right. One thing that I do specifically want people to the best that Kevin and I came up with in brainstorming was feedback size bits. That really doesn't fill me with warm fuzzy feelings, but feedback size is in bits, whereas plain text length is in bytes because we expect you to pass plain text.length. So definitely here we wanted it to say bits, and then it seemed like it should match everywhere. But should it be feedback bits, feedback size bits, feedback size in bits? No one cares because it's crypto.
Feedback size bits seems fine. I'm just looking through the APIs again real fast. So none of these APIs take a key. They expect you to set the key property.
Yes. The instance manages the key, and that's all it does anymore. Or if you're using these methods, that's all it does.
Okay.
And tells you what algorithm you're using, I guess. Okay.
Yeah. The modifications make sense to me.
Sounds like it's crypto. No one cares.
I think your distinction in the arguments where the padding argument explicitly taking bits is a good call out. That the plain text is in bytes, not bits, and the padding is in bits. So yeah, that all makes sense.
Okay. Sorry, I'm gluing all the stuff together right now. Breaking it apart for being easy to review is great, but then, makes it hard to post the.
Yeah. Though if we had to prioritize standing up a parallel better stack over this, I would absolutely be in favor of that. But yeah.
Is there a way to refactor the stack such that it's not completely parallel, but that we introduce, not completely parallel in terms of the implementation, but that there's a new set of APIs that are like, here are the good APIs. And we've got these old APIs that kind of wrap them and are there for legacy, but really we want you to use the new APIs?
That would be the thing that we don't have an answer to yet, which is why we haven't invented a new crypto stack. Plus, we'd have to figure out a new namespace for it.
Yeah. So as a little bit of historical context, the reason that there are base classes and all of these properties on these classes is because when these were designed, we were trying to go for cryptographic agility, which is you can just kind of replace the algorithm under the covers and everything should kind of sort of keep working. It turns out this isn't the right way to get agility. Like an application actually has to know things about the properties of the algorithm it's working with. Like it has to know things about how AES not behaves, but how it's configured, for instance, separately from something like DES or triple DES. like AES GCM is actually different than AES CBC. Like we can't pretend that they're the same thing. They require different kinds of configuration. So our existing classes aren't holding up well in this new world. That's one of the big problems. And why, in fact, we have an AES GCM class and it has nothing whatsoever to do with any of the types that we just looked at today. Because it does look so very different.
Yeah. I guess, like, I don't have a ton of context on this, but it feels like we're kind of defining a parallel stack anyway by introducing a whole bunch of new APIs, but we're kind of, at the same time, we're doing it on the existing classes, which may end up being the worst of both worlds. You know what I mean?
I don't think it's the worst of both worlds, but I think it doesn't get us quite to where we want to go. Like if we're at point A and I would like us to be at point Z, this gets us to point, like, I don't know, F or something, which, sure, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, this is the one-shots are just simplifying the call pattern of do stuff, call create encryptor, and then either blindly call transform final block and be like, yeah, I know all the inbox ones, let me call transform final block and give it all the data in one shot. Or, you know, this theoretically would do it safer. So, but yeah, it's...
Let me ask one more question before we move on. Sorry. I'm
Okay.
just thinking about this from, like, if I'm a consumer of this, like, say, Quick, right? If I'm a consumer of this and I know I want to use exactly this algorithm, then I get it. This works fine. If I'm a consumer and I, like let's say I'm the Quick code and I want to, you know, and I need to support a variety of different suites and potentially different settings on those things, and so therefore I need some abstraction where I can say, hey, here's the, you know, crypto settings we're going to use, instantiate, you know, some instance of some abstraction that I can just call decrypt and encrypt on. These APIs don't really help me at all, right?
I would say if you want an abstraction, you shouldn't be using the primitives like this. You should be using a much higher level API, something that can handle all of the abstractions on your behalf, and that can handle things like key management for you. Like
Yeah.
I would never ever recommend somebody who needs agility to use these abstractions. I think these abstractions are very ill suited for that purpose. In
Right.
fact, in the ASP.NET Crypto Stack, we do not use these abstractions.
Because, like, the, you know, you mentioned Cipher Suite. So for TLS, right, for a long time, everything was based on cipher block chaining, where it's in this particular place you got the IV, or you computed the IV, and you had your session key, and you used CBC to go along and do things, and then they added CCM and GCM modes and Cha-Cha Poly, and those completely change what the data flow looks like. Instead of doing a separate MAC, it uses the inbuilt authentication algorithm, but that actually produces... It's a different function. It doesn't take ciphertext or plain text and a key and an IV and produce an output. It takes all those things and produces two outputs. One is the encrypted stuff, and one is how you verify that it didn't get tampered with. And so there is no such thing as for GCM go do this stuff and turn it into the bytes, because it produces two different sets of bytes. And so that's where all of these stuff, that most of this stack was invented to make encrypted XML work for .NET Framework 2. And it worked because there were only like two modes, and it handled all the stuff for you, but it hasn't aged well.
So I think what I heard you guys say, tell me if I'm getting this right, is most people don't actually want to deal with this in an abstract way. They either want to deal specifically with one of these encryption modes, or they want to deal with an abstraction at a much higher level that abstracts away the differences between other things like Cha-Cha and crap like that. Is that right?
Largely. Like, this would be used in encrypted XML, but it won't because it's a net standard 2.0 package. And like signed or encrypted CMS, I guess envelope CMS, where you have some stuff and it does magic and it's safe. And
we have requests where people have a key and some secret data, and they want to take that key and use it to encrypt the secret data, and we don't have an API for that right now.
But these would be used
Like
by the
we-
stuff in the
yeah.
middle,
Yeah.
not easy end user code.
Yeah. We could create an API like that, but
As
whatever.
long as we don't do AD, or sorry, AE.
Yeah.
All right.
Awesome.
But yeah, if you have thoughts, Jeff, happy to talk offline for how to make a crypto stack that both works and is easy to use.
Well, do you guys have any notes or context on that? I mean, my knowledge of the crypto stack is just deep enough to be dangerous. You know what I mean? So I don't know that I have the right level of context to really. But anyway, let's take it offline.
Yeah. All right. 33770. It's a analyzer proposal that we warn if you're using of type T with an impossible cast.
Yeah, I can talk about that one. The linked issue in the Rosling analyzer proposals has a bit more information, but we try to summarize it here under that link. This analyzer would affect cast and of type if we want to keep it contained. We would have to detect the type that we're using in T and the type of the element from which we're calling the method. And if they don't match, then we throw the warning.
This seems reasonable. The compiler already notifies you if you have a static cast that it knows is going to fail at runtime.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There would be no fixer for this one. We could cause a compilation problem if we did. So just the warning. Also, we already have someone who jumped in to create a PR for this, but it happened because they created a PR before we decided to do weekly triage on the runtime side and approving them as API proposals. So we just asked them to wait for this to be approved.
I mean, seems fine to me. Anything that would be the suspicious cast that you can prove, because I believe that of type and cast are defined on IEnumerable, not just IEnumerable of T, and on that one you can't prove anything, but when it's an IEnumerable of T, then you can. So
I see. There's
Yeah,
a comment.
I think this is fine. I was going to say, I think this is fine. My only hesitancy with this is I do wonder if it's starting to get into the realm of things like, would this actually catch, with what we could catch, would it actually catch real issues in people's code? And if yes, then great. If no, then we're kind of doing work and adding cost for little value.
I think for cast, it would be like when you get to this line, it's going to fail, but of type, I think it's useful in the why is this never finding anything?
It could also, for cast, it could also be useful in the sense that, like, hey, did you mean convert or something instead? Like, I have an int array and I want to turn it into an IEnumerable of long. There are methods that you can call to do that, and cast is not the right API.
That's fair.
Yeah, but I mean that one you would have hit the line and it would have thrown. So
it would have, yeah. This is just telling you ahead of time, like, hey, you probably meant to do this other thing instead.
Yeah. Which is why, yeah, I think of type is you ran through this thing and you're always getting an empty list, and when you look at it, you're like, oh, well, it just means that, I've never been called with a thing that matched. It's like, well, no, because it turns out you have an impossible line of code here. But, so yeah, especially since somebody else already did the work, I don't think it's detrimental to have it done. Is, I guess, my personal opinion. So you're okay with it, Steve?
Yeah, I don't have any strong objections. And I mean, if it turns out it's really helpful, then great. And if it turns out it's useless, then we can always, delete it later.
Yep. I don't know if reliability is the right category, but I can't think of a better one, and warning seems fine as a
Reliability seems
TFM
okay because
warning.
it's telling you about an exception that will occur at runtime. Is correctness a category?
I mean, I guess cast is reliability, and of type is, hey, you have an expensive no-op here.
Yeah. Yeah, because I wouldn't put it under performance. It would be under, like, you probably actually have a bug in your application if you wrote this. Whether that's reliability or correctness, whatever.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Another analyzer.
I can speak to this one. So this is basically, we have overloads of string.concat that take spans. And when we were going through, when we added that and we went through the runtime code looking for where we could use it, there were a ton of places that were like string.concat, some string.substring, some string. And that can be changed to some, string.concat, some string.asSpan instead of substring and then substring. And you end up saving on the substring allocation. It can also potentially, if you're using the plus operator instead, you could change those to be string.concat calls for the same benefit. So basically, it's pushing you towards avoiding intermediate string allocations.
Yep.
I think
the
Levi,
limitation
if
here.
I remember. I was just going to say, I think if I remember correctly, I saw a comment from Levi asking about whether we want to push people towards spans. And for me, this one is kind of, if we're going to do it at all, like this one's sort of the best kind because you don't actually have to write read-only span in your code at all. It's just you're changing .substring to .asSpan. And so you're not actually seeing, span of char or read-only span of char in your code or anything like that.
Yeah, my comment was on a different but related issue because this is one of like three or four issues in the same category. And yeah, it was bringing up like read-only span of char is yet another concept that people would have to be introduced to. But I agree with Steve here. I think like it's not actually really in your face here. Like it's pretty well hidden where we're not really introducing new concept counts into the mix. I can kind of maybe half make the argument there are actually edge cases where calling as span will in fact hurt performance, but those are like really crazy edge cases, maybe not worth worrying about. And those edge cases would be, if stir1 and stir3 are empty, and stir2 you're substringing to be the entire thing, basically. Like it's
sure.
I don't know.
Then the implementation would end up running the original string 2 rather than creating a new.
Yeah, but I mean, how often does that occur in practice? Probably not worth
Yeah,
worrying about.
and I don't even know if our concat implementation checks if anything's empty.
It does. It's optimized for that.
Fair enough. But yeah.
Along those lines, I haven't tested this, but does the plus operator work with 2 read-only span of chars? Like, does it actually hit string.concat? No.
No.
Wouldn't it? Because I guess if you had 2 read-only span of chars, it would say it doesn't know what plus means, but a string plus a read-only span of char will implicit call toString and then switch to string.concat.
Well, so
No, but
there's no operator
This
plus.
is object overload. You can't box a span.
Okay, got it.
So it fails to compile if you do stir plus roschar?
I'm 99% sure, but prove me wrong.
Yeah, and I haven't tested this, obviously. So.
Okay, I mean, like, I guess I haven't tried it, but my thought of how the stuff works is if the compiler knows it's a string plus some other object, it calls .toString, and then it transforms string plus into a static call to string.concat. So I feel my instinct is all the transforms are in the compiler.
It's possible things have changed since I last saw it, since I last looked at it. But in the past, it's been if all the inputs are strings, then it delegates to string.concat with string inputs. If any of them is not a string, then it delegates to string.concat with object inputs.
Yeah, he's right. I'm testing this right now.
Okay, so the toString is done by the string.concat method that takes objects, and not by a direct call from the compiler. Okay. Fair enough. Okay, so yeah, I think to me it makes sense whether it's using the pluses or a call to string.concat. That if it looks like it's a string concatenation, that we with a substring expression in it, that we should flag it as this could be as span. So.
Yep. Should check. What's the arity of our overloads on that?
For span, we have 2, 3, and 4.
Got it. Okay. That should cover most cases.
Yeah, I think I found one case that would have, like, one case in system runtime where we would have benefited from a 5, and like in one case where we would have benefited from a 6 or something, but it just wasn't worth adding the overloads.
Yeah. Is there, talking about concept count, switching from a friendly plus operator to string.concat, are we okay with that? Surfacing that to people?
I mean, do we think that this is going to be a default or an opt-in?
I think it certainly wouldn't be a warning. I think it could be a suggestion that's on by default, an info level thing. And if we were concerned about that, we could split them into 2 diagnostic IDs, one for string concat and one for plus. But I don't have a strong preference.
Okay, yeah, it does say suggested severity info.
Yeah, because I imagine there's a lot of code like this that exists today. So it might be a bit noisy if we were to turn it on by default, but I mean, you all have expertise on that.
Yeah, I mean, that's where, like, the suggestions are already pretty darn noisy, but they also don't show up at all in compile time builds. They just show up in the ID suggestion and as squiggles. There's the next level down of hidden, which would also be fine, where if you happen to be on that line, you'll get the little light bulb, but it won't show up in the suggestions window. So we could choose either of those. I don't have a strong preference, and of course anyone can override them.
Yeah. Historically, how useful have people found performance analyzers and fixers just historically?
So this one in particular found a whole bunch of places in .NET Runtime.
I believe that, absolutely.
Yeah, okay. Some of them are like, there's a wide variety. Like the one that Prashant had added that was about, I forget what it was. It was like changing strings to characters with certain APIs. That changed a huge number of call sites in .NET Runtime. Each of them is a very minor win, but in theory, it all contributes to the peanut butter across and adds up.
Yeah.
I've had a conversation with a few customers that have tried these with .NET 5, and they've generally been, like the reaction is sharing like, yeah, that's nice. Okay, I'll apply that. And it's not, oh my goodness, this was amazing, but just sort of generally, oh yeah, that's goodness. I think this one,
all the low-hanging fruit adds up, certainly, absolutely.
Yeah. I think this one in particular will be one of the more impactful ones.
Okay.
Along with, I think, like in the last I think probably one of the more impactful ones, and it still remains to be seen, but the one that we shipped in .NET 5 around changing which overload of read and write async on stream you use, because then you avoid allocations for tasks and stuff like that, and potentially in the pooling and whatnot. So I think, I don't know, I think it remains to be seen overall, but I think we've sort of seen generally trending towards positive.
Okay, awesome.
I guess what's this in the middle?
That one is closely related, which seems to require a separate analyzer.
Yeah.
Unless you guys think we can join them, but
I mean, it does feel like it does generalize to the same kind of problem of you're passing a substring and there is an overload that would take a span. Well, a read-only span. So, yeah. Do we think that we would want it to be more like that, more generalized? You're using a substring in a parameter expression, and you could have used as span instead? Or do we want to look at it as two separate issues, one specifically for string concat because it has to deal with pluses, and the other for the general form? Though it would flag direct calls to string.concat.
I do see them as two separate issues just because they're actually changing the structure of the code. Because one is changing an operator to a method call. Even though it's the same under the covers, it makes the code look and feel different. Whereas this keeps the structure of the code. So I think something like this would be easier for people to reason about. But that's just an opinion.
Reasonable. So would your suggestion be that for the string concat one, that we do the operator to string.concat as one thing, and then let the string.concat substring to string.concat as span just fall into this generalized solution? Or just always leave the string one as special and teach this one don't care if it's string concat? I think we don't want two analyzers firing for the same line of code for the same problem.
I don't think we would have two analyzers because the analyzer that's looking at plus wouldn't trap string.concat, and this analyzer, if it's looking at a method call, wouldn't trap operators, right?
Right, so that would be the other one only does, hey, I need to change your thing from using pluses to doing a method, or like it's really doing a method call anyway, but your syntax is going to change from pluses to a method call, and this one would then be anything that's a method call.
Yeah, but the fixer for the first one should just fix both things at the same time.
Sure.
Just because you don't want to right click fix again.
yeah, that's the key. Both things have to be fixed at the same time. The other one.
Yeah.
So since we're already looking at this, is it small enough, simple enough to maybe also prove it?
Yeah, I mean, like that's, yeah, so, because it changes what the approval notes will be for the previous one.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I think this one is if you can find an overload that instead of using substring could have used as span, suggest that. And the other one is if you're using only operator plus, then it wants to do the suggestion. And now both scenarios are covered, but with different things.
That seems reasonable.
Steve? That's the only other person who spoke.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
At the end of the day, it just impacts what diagnostic ID you get, right?
Yeah, but it means that
Yeah.
so the string one will be specialized for, hey, I have to convert your pluses to string concat, and then if you were already calling string concat, that uses the generalized use as span instead of substring.
Sounds good.
Yeah. As long as the experience is right-click fix once, then I think we're okay.
Okay. So, do you feel that this covered the operator one?
Yes.
Yes, the first point explains that clearly. That would be a different analyzer for the second case in the first point.
Yep.
Yep. And the second bullet clearly says the fixer should do both things together.
Okay.
And now it even suggests code that will compile.
Hooray. Even better.
Alright. And this one gets to jump from suggestion to approved of
Who has been handling these historically, like implementing them?
Oh, go ahead.
Okay,
In the Rosling analyzer repo, Manish, yeah.
got it.
Which Manish? Vasani?
No, man god.
Okay. We've
I don't
got,
remember.
like,
I don't remember how to pronounce his last name, but I love that his alias is man god.
Because we've
No,
got
this
like
this Manish
4 or 5
Vasani.
Manishas.
Oh, never mind. Okay.
Okay,
Manish
okay,
Vasani.
it is Vasani. Yeah, we've got like 4 or 5 Benishas on the between the Roslyn and Runtime Libraries teams, so I can never remember which one is doing which things.
Alright. So for the other one, if you're calling substring, but you could call as span and it would compile, do that.
Mhm.
That's the compress it to one sentence. But
Yeah.
alright. Cool.
Thank you.
Suggestion goes to ready. Ready goes to approved, because I don't know what all transitions Emo's tool uses. Okay.
Mine?
Yep.
So the background on this bug is, or this API request is, we have a couple places inside the runtime that have extension methods with this exact overload in it, where you want to specify a method's name, the binding flags, and the types of the parameters. And the only way to do that today is also if you pass in null for the binder and null for the calling. I can't remember what the modifiers, right?
Yeah. Or you can
And
call
so-
the other big ugly one.
Right, right. And so the problem with using, internal extension methods is the linker can't see through them. And so we had a bunch of trimming bugs that, since places in the runtime were using these internal extension methods that the linker didn't know about, the linker was failing to find the methods that it needed to preserve. So what I did is changed literally hundreds of call sites to putting in these 2 nulls for the binder and the modifiers, and instead kind of thought this is a useful overload for both get method and get constructor on type itself. We should have it.
Yeah. I've written this code so many times in my own projects.
Yep.
The
So
idea that the implementation would just be forward to the other overload with null binder and null modifier.
yeah, I think it's a thing that if we were allowed to reinvent the class, we would change a bunch of parameter orders and make them all defaulted parameters. But
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this makes sense to me. So the extension method was internal.
Right. Well, yeah. There's been multiple of them. I found a couple already.
But there's no public extension method that we're
Right. Yeah. It was all just like internal to the library that didn't trim any, or that failed to trim correctly. You know, remove that extension method and then make it call the ugly overloads.
Yeah.
And then hopefully, if this gets approved, I can remove all those calls to this new method. And then the linker will have to know about this method, but the way it's written, it'll just pick this up automatically.
I imagine that would be a simple change to the linker.
Right.
Okay.
I mean, it already knows about the other 10 overloads of get method.
Oh, so does that mean that if we introduce new overloads to get method in the future, the linker kind of understands already?
Potentially.
Huh.
It's got some. Yeah, I was looking at the logic this morning actually, and it's got some assumptions that if there's a binding flags parameter, it's the second.
Clever.
It's the second parameter.
Okay.
So both the get method and gets constructor. The other ones can return null, so this can return null. I don't think there's any attributes that need to go on them either.
And the nullability of type system.type array is correct?
That's what it is on the other ones.
Okay.
It's non-nullable, and you can't have null types.
Sounds good. I like that there's, what is it, like a types.empty accelerator for an empty type array.
Yeah, and we've never, we're very inconsistent across .NET runtime about whether we use array.empty type or type.missing or whatever it's called, type.empty types, I think. One of the things I've had on my like long to-do list is, you know, potentially go and rationalizing all of that, but I've just never done it since it didn't kind of, you know, rise to that level of, yeah.
I mean, it just calls array.empty underneath the cover, right?
Right.
Most of what I've seen was.
I think it's a static field that's initialized to array empty or something like that.
Yeah.
Oh.
I mean, if type.empty types or whatever just calls the array.empty of t, then that seems the fewest number of instances of that array that actually exist. Okay, I don't want to look at suggesting different parameter orders because it's just taking existing things and dropping parameters out. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks.
Pick your battles, Jeremy. Pick your battles.
It's usable. That's what matters.
All right. Kill socket task extensions 43901. Still with us, Jeff?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry. I was distracted. I apologize.
No
We
worries.
talked about 2 weeks ago, I think. We have this socket task extensions thing that exists for historical reasons, where we have all of the task-based APIs on socket are currently defined as extension methods as opposed to instance methods. So the proposal here is just define instance methods for all of these and then go mark the existing APIs and socket task extensions as editor browsable never, and that's it. So there's literally there's effectively no new API here. It's literally just take the existing socket task extensions APIs, make them instance methods instead of extension methods.
Okay, and can you remind me why we have the extensions class? I know you said for historical reasons, but presumably there was a problem we're trying to solve and we don't think it matters anymore.
We initially had a NuGet. We're contemplating or shipped or something a NuGet package to add these APIs to framework as well.
But we didn't do it.
That's, if I remember correctly, we didn't end up doing it, or I think we added them directly to framework rather than I think we added this type directly to framework.
Okay. All right, so on the basis that, yeah, it's just copy all of the signatures as is. Because we can't change the connect async that doesn't have a cancellation token. We can't add the default parameter because that would change task value, task parity. So, yeah, all signatures as is, and then EB never.
And potentially obsolete. I mean, I don't know that there's the compiler should never end up binding to the extension method, so you'd only get an obsolete warning if you're recalling socket task extensions directly, I think.
Yeah, because the instance method will always win unless you call it in static syntax.
Right.
Yeah, I mean the EB never just prevents it from showing up as the same method twice in IntelliSense. I don't know that the obsolete would be necessary. I mean, we could do it. It would tell if somebody was calling it in static syntax. It would say stop doing that. But all right. Where does socket task extensions ship? That's just in Nets.
It's in system net sockets and net core app.
Okay, so shared runtime.
Yeah.
Okay, so no one should have a torn state between seeing an old version of a package and the new version of the socket class.
No, I don't think we even shipped a package. I could be wrong, but I think that never ended up happening.
Yes, no, no. Fine. Obviously, I did not remember the name. Emo has a new site he's working on, which contains things like NuGet package data. Yep, looks like we shoved the extensions class into system for framework. And system net sockets is part of net core app, so yeah, we
messed up.
I mean, I guess system net sockets in net core 1 was a package because everything was a package.
Right.
But presumably it's in the same. We don't expect anyone ever to actually look at the package anymore, and we probably stopped publishing it. And now you just get it out of. Yeah, because now you get it out of net standard. Oh, that sucks. whatever. Right. So net standard compilers will still go through the static invocation because they will. But that's fine. Just means you can't delete the class. But you couldn't anyway. All right. Any other thoughts?
Just one related thought, which is there are a couple new async socket APIs approved for 6.0 that we will not add to socket task extensions now. In fact, they're probably defined currently in terms of socket task extensions, but they will just get changed to be instance methods. I don't think there are any that have been added yet, but there are some that have been approved.
There, I'll be fancy. Be nimble with regard to approved but not implemented ones.
Sounds good.
All right. All right. 439030 add configuration binder.bind of t overloads. So this is extensions.
Unless Stefan knows about this one, we might need to skip it.
Yeah, sorry. I wasn't prepared for this issue. What's the title again?
Add configuration binder.bind of t overloads.
Yeah, maybe we should put this in another meeting where perhaps David is here.
Okay.
Yeah, I What's the issue number again? Just so I can open it.
439030.
Thanks.
When you say four, do you pronounce it four or four?
I say for, like FOR,
Okay.
not FOWER.
Not four.
Yeah. I also pronounce 5 wrong, because...
Oh, not five?
Correct.
Yeah.
But, you know. And dot. I pronounce it as dot. If you're... For random things, because why not? If you're changing frequencies and you're an American plane talking to American air traffic control, they'll tell you to, like, go to, you know, 121.75. I think that's a valid number. But if it's an international flight talking to American air traffic control or an American plane talking to any other air traffic control division, it would be 121.75.
Ah.
So we use point or dot, and they use, or international, it's decimal. Because, you know, some people use commas. So.
Yes.
Okay, 439033, add a span overload for socket receive message from.
Yeah, this is just one that we missed in previous API review. You can see the previously approved one up there. It's just spanifying the existing sync method. We spanified send to and receive from, but not receive message from.
Okay. Is there a send message to?
No.
Okay. Looks fine to me. Is there any virtualness that needs to be considered here, or is this non-virtual?
Nope.
correctly non-virtual. Okay. I'm happy with it. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'm looking at the existing overlay. That looks right. Okay.
We have a received message from async on the task extensions
We do.
that has an array segment. Like, we don't want to spanify any of those.
Maybe we do.
I don't know. I'm just asking.
Well, no, I hadn't noticed. No, I think we have approved APIs for that. Let me double check.
Right. Because, yeah, looks like send to async takes read-only memory, but send to async only takes array segment.
Well, I guess this can't be span because they're async.
Well, but it
Yeah,
can be
there's-
memory.
There is an approved issue for this already.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
You can see if you're interested, it's 33418. Scroll down to the yeah, right here. Socket task extensions has memory and cancellation token overloads for send to async, receive from async, and receive message from async.
Got it. Perfect.
And to our the comments earlier, all of these will no longer be added to socket task extensions. This issue now updates them to, yeah, we will update this issue to actually put them as instance methods on socket.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, that satisfies me.
Cool. Does anybody believe we can get through priority queue in half an hour?
I think we should do an hour-long segment for it.
We have a dedicated meeting next week for priority queue.
Okay.
Oh, perfect.
All right. 44213 thread
I don't
pool
think this one is
register
ready for review.
work item handler.
I mean, I don't think there was agreement on what this should actually be.
Okay.
And neither Marek or Alexi are here, right?
Okay.
Or
So
Pam.
are you suggesting that we skip it for now, Steve, or that it actually get unmarked?
I'm suggesting, yeah, I think it should be unmarked, and like Count and Alexi should come up with the concrete thing they believe needs to be done. Right now, it's like 6 different alternatives to be discussed. I don't think there's, and I'm not sure the primary one that was proposed has issues. So yeah.
Done. All right. Make it easy to make an enumerable of one element.
So I could speak to it, or Eric could. It's what it sounds like. It's take a single element and create an IEnumerable. I have raised concerns on the thread about this, so I will just air them here as well. Which is, we already have this. It's new open brace, close brace, open paren item, or open, new array item, basically. It already exists. I don't know why we need a new API for it, but obviously people disagree with me. We have a second way of doing it as well, which is enumerable.repeat item comma 1. So, I mean, I don't know why we need something new, but obviously people like this for some reason.
Maybe it's easier to find singleton than deduce that the alternative that already exists is the way to do it right now.
I mean, possibly they don't want it to be able to be cast away into an array. Like they don't want the write back semantics through a cast. But which would be repeat 1. Yield?
Yield kind of makes sense in the sense that it matches the yield keyword if you're writing an enumerable method.
Yeah, sort of.
Yeah. I mean, task.yield and enumerable.yield clearly do the same thing, right?
Indeed.
Clearly.
Because, so, Eric T., you're the one who marked it ready for review. Which name do you think it wants?
I don't really have a strong opinion. I just marked it ready for review because there wasn't really anything else to discuss, and I think it's probably up for API review to determine whether we want to do this or not do it. In terms of the name, yield sounds okay.
Like, I don't know that if I, typed enumerable dot and I was looking for how do I want to turn this one item into an enumerable thing. I don't know that yield would ever be a thing I looked for.
The funny thing is, if right now you type enumerable.single and then pass in the string hello, like it actually compiles and throws an exception at runtime.
Yeah, because there's more than one character in hello.
Yes. So I don't think single is the right word here.
Indeed. And singleton is not right because singleton means the one instance of a type.
Yeah. Like I can kind of half see value in like I want a one element immutable array, but I would rather have a generalized like read-only array type if we were to do that, rather than something hanging off of enumerable.
Yeah, I mean, I think that. So personally, I feel that there's not going to be a good name for it that is descriptive and discoverable, and then it's back to Steve's. Why do we need it? It's actually more characters to use it than to write new, and if you want to avoid the ability for someone to cast it and then write back to it for whatever reason, but you don't care, you threw it in an expression, then call repeat 1.
Something that's actually missing from the discussion on GitHub is like, how do people actually use this in practice? I see a few implementations, but I don't see any sample code that would actually consume such an API.
Presumably the same way you would use enumerable.range.
Yes, but as Steve and others already said, like you can use new open close square brace, open close curly brace item, which gives you the exact same thing. So we're not saving people keystrokes. So what's the scenario that this API unblocks?
probably none whatsoever.
Do we care about discoverability? Like, would some people just not think to create a one-element array, or do we even care?
I think people know how to create arrays more than they know how to use link extension methods.
Well, this wouldn't be an extension. It would have to be this would be on
That's
enumerable
yeah.
as a static
It would
call.
be okay.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
I guess another point here is that many of the API requests we can decline because they're typically extension methods and users can define their own, but because this is just a static method, we just can't do that.
Right.
Yeah. Static everything, maybe. Maybe that's a request for the C# team.
It is. They think they're this close on extension everything. Emo tried to get extension statics prioritized, and I believe Matt said we're this close on everything.
Sure, but without a concrete example in the issue of like, what scenario does this unblock? Like, what code does it make look cleaner? Like, we're just kind of spitballing here, because I think we're assuming that people are going to use it as the root in order to write that people are going to use it as the root and then start chaining other link extension methods off of it, which might be one scenario, but I think we're all in agreement it's not really an interesting scenario, because again, you can do it today by newing up an array. Do people expect to use this and then pass it into a non-link consumer? I would be interested to see code examples if people wanted to do that, because maybe we're just not seeing the scenario correctly. But yeah.
I do not feel that Steve struck naming gold with yield. I think it makes sense once you know why it's called yield.
Yeah.
I just noticed how old this issue is. 2015.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, of is reasonable. One is reasonable. Items, which takes some stuff and or params, is reasonable. But yeah, I agree with Levi. I think it would be interesting to see. Because, okay, yes. Here is the place that it comes up. You have an existing thing and you want to call append. No. Yeah. Well, because they used a cat, but you can use append or prepend, which I think takes a single item. Yeah, that is solved by append.
Is there an append that takes a single item? Because I've definitely wanted to do that before.
But that doesn't change the whole, you could just do
Yeah.
a single element array.
Oh,
thing,
there
right?
is.
Append only takes a single item.
Oh, I'm thinking concat. Never mind.
Right. So the problem is when you want to call concat, or you're thinking, I need to glue things together, oh, that's concat. But if it's only one item, then it's called append and prepend.
So as far as the naming goes, you guys were talking about that. What was the objection to yield?
I don't think anyone would ever think of it. Like, if you wanted to do this and you write enumerable dot, are you going to see yield and be like, oh yeah, that's the one I want? Like, enumerable dot yield sounds to me like break out of a for loop.
Yeah, I could see it. It is like the most upvoted suggestion that I see on the issue. But
are there
fair
languages that don't allow you to initialize an array in line?
Yeah. Okay, so the one, looking at things that are on enumerable right now, enumerable.accept is maybe a place that I would think of it. You have the one thing, and I want all the things that aren't this. You need to turn that into an enumerable. But yes, you could call new. You're not really saving anything by using anything else. Like, it's going to allocate an object. And if we do it as a yield return, I think it's a bigger object than an array. So my feeling is that yield is not a good name, or yield is not a very discoverable name. Something like Steve's suggestion in the middle of items, which takes 1, in, params, seems reasonable to me if we think that there's a scenario for it, but I also don't see that there's a scenario for it. So I kind of want to say needs work of show some examples of where you want to use it.
At the point it's been 5 years, would we ever close this issue? Is something we just don't want because we could do single element arrays or whatever, and there's no good name. That after 5 years, you think we'd come up with one.
Right, and the other so the other option is hit close and say why it's closed, and if somebody comes back with data, then it can get reopened.
Yeah. There might be a valid reason for this that we're just not seeing right now. I want to leave that possibility open. Unlikely, maybe, but
yeah, I mean, but we can hit close and write some notes of.
True.
We can always reopen it if someone can explain what we're missing.
Yeah, that seems reasonable to me. Community chat has been kind of quiet today, from what I'm looking at. I think everyone's looking at the
conference,
the launch, the conference, yeah. Or they're all just playing with their Xboxes, or they're all ordering new Apple hardware. I don't know.
All right. Anybody have anything to add to why I'm about to hit close?
Nope.
Do we need to mark it as like API rejected or something for Nemo's tool?
I believe closed is rejected.
Okay.
But I'll take away ready for review just so if it gets reopened, it's not immediately back to ready.
We have faith in Nemo's tool.
Yep. Wow, we're making really good progress. I've had to open more tabs multiple times.
Ooh.
All right, 20064. Allow for specifying return value on blank or default methods.
Oops.
Okay, so this is just the existing signatures, comma, default value.
I don't know if I would put this. I haven't read the description here, but I don't know if I would immediately put stuff like this on Queryable because that might have implications for things like link to SQL. I guess the other big question would be like, is it reasonable to require somebody to always create the default value up front if it's non-trivial?
Right, yeah, I was wondering if this is like, the concurrent collections, if we feel that we need a default value and then if you get here, call this function, I'll give you a default value.
Is there a concept in the framework of nullable of t, but where t doesn't have to be a struct? Like a difference between like I had a value and it was null versus I don't have a value at all for you.
No.
Like an optional.
Something like that, yeah.
Yes, like optional, except we don't have it because we have nullable, except it only works for value types. And now, watch the dog chase its tail.
Yeah. Because if we had something like that, then we don't need this, for instance. I mean, another option, and this isn't very link-like, is to out a parameter which says like, I returned a I found and returned a value to you, versus I fabricated default of t. But you can't chain that once you start involving out.
Yep. Do we have precedent for that in link APIs?
To have out parameters? I don't think so. Granted, this is kind of the end of link because this is returning a single value to you rather than an enumerable. Mm-hmm. So you wouldn't normally have this on the interior of a link chain. But still, it doesn't really follow the established pattern.
I thought we had added something, but I don't see it here, and searching is hard, especially when I'm driving.
Well, what's wrong with telling? What's wrong with just using default if empty, which is an existing API? So you would have your link expression dot default if empty t source dot single, because if you do default if empty, like dot single after it is always going to succeed.
Yeah, I mean, the first comment is this would be an alternative.
Yeah.
To having to use that API.
Yeah, and I'm latching onto that. Like, what's wrong with that?
Yeah, I mean, technically there is an ambiguity here if you have an enumerable of func of t, comma bool. No, because then it would need to be a func of t. Bool to bool.
Actually, yeah. I don't think that is completely equivalent, right? I mean, wouldn't you have to do select predicate dot default if empty x dot single, because you can't do the predicate after the default if empty.
No, you would do first.
What do you mean first instead of what? Oh, okay. So you're saying you do?
Actually, no. Sorry, that wouldn't work. That is actually different.
Seems like we should be clear about what the equivalent is here.
Yeah. So the equivalent is actually select of predicate dot default if empty dot single. Right.
Yeah, because you need the predicate before the notion of empty.
Which means slightly nastier than
Yeah.
we thought, but maybe it's still not that nasty.
I mean, what's the harm of the overloads? I kind of assumed we already had them. Like, I don't think it adds a ton of like complexity to the IntelliSense or whatever. The names make sense. I think people would correctly assume what it does.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it seems reasonable to me, except for, I mean, the two questions are, is there a concern with queryable because of link to SQL? And I don't know how to answer that one. And do we think, are we adding enough value with just tsource and not need to also do func of tsource?
I don't think a lot of our existing link extension methods allow tsource factories.
Well, they also don't allow you to specify the default. So
yeah,
like, I'm fine with saying once you need the factory, now you need to do something more complicated.
Yeah. I suspect maybe the common use case will be you pass an existing singleton in here.
Yeah.
At which point, like, it's already free.
Factory? Oh.
Does
no.
default? No.
So at least it's consistent.
So there has been another concern raised about this particular proposal, namely that default in these method names means a very specific thing, which is not the case for the particular proposals. Would that be a source for concern?
It's the same as default if empty, right?
Yeah,
correct.
We already have that pattern, yeah.
I mean, that being said, it's not particularly ambiguous what this thing is doing, regardless of that slight conflict in terminology.
Yeah, I mean, singular default does trip people up because what they want it to be is, if it's single, give it to me, otherwise give me the default. And what it means is, if it's empty, give me the default. If it's single, give me the single. And if it's more than single, then throw. And I think that always confuses people.
Yeah, and in that case, first or default would be probably what most of those people want. Like, if it's more than one, regardless of how many there are in it, give me the first thing, or if it's empty, just
well,
fabricate.
But that's not the same as if there are two, give me the default.
Oh, yeah, correct.
So, if count is one, give me the thing, otherwise give me the default, is what people read out of singular default, and then they get the exception, and then they go rar and deal with it.
That's existing behavior, though. We're not introducing complexity.
Yeah, because all that this... So, Eric, unless I'm missing something here, all that this would do is take the existing singular default, first or default, last or default, and they would just call this with default, and then everything behaves the same. So,
yep.
Where right now it is returning default, this is just saying you wanted a default other than the zero initialized value.
Correct.
Which matches nullable and a few other things, get value or default.
Yeah, and personally, I've come across this issue too many times, so I think there would be value in adding these methods.
Yeah. So who would have any idea of whether or not the query